Welcome to my channel. The city lights flickered against the rain-speckled windshield as Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. Jason sat in the back seat, his presence a silent weight pressing against the air between them. The hum of the engine filled the space, but it did nothing to drown out the unease coiling in Michael's chest. He had agreed to drive Jason home as a favor. Nothing more. A simple ride, a routine act of kindness. But something about Jason's demeanor felt off. He shifted uncomfortably, his breaths uneven, as if he were mustering the courage to say something that could not be taken back. Michael caught Jason's reflection in the rearview mirror, his dark eyes heavy with something unspoken. "What's wrong?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Jason hesitated. Then, with a slow, measured breath, he spoke. "I need to tell you something. It's about us." The words sent a chill down Michael's spine. His pulse quickened, a sharp contrast to the rhythmic patter of rain against the glass. Jason leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just a mistake." Michael's heart clenched. He didn't need further explanation. He already knew. The shadows of suspicion that had lurked at the edges of his mind now solidified into something undeniable. His grip on the wheel tightened as the weight of betrayal settled over him like a suffocating fog. Outside, the streetlights blurred, distorted. By the tears he refused to let fall. Jason's voice was pleading now. "Michael, please." Michael exhaled, his breath shaky. He couldn't look back. Not now. Not when everything he thought he knew was unraveling in the dim glow of the rearview mirror. The silence between them was unbearable. The low rumble of the car and the occasional swish of windshield wipers did little to ease the tension that had settled like a storm cloud in the confined space. Michael focused on the road ahead, but his mind reeled, caught between past suspicions and the terrifying certainty creeping in with every second. Jason sat in the back seat, shoulders hunched, hands wringing together in his lap. The weight of his unspoken words was suffocating. Michael could feel it pressing against him, demanding to be acknowledged. "Say it," Michael finally said, his voice tight. "Just say whatever the hell it is you've been holding back." Jason inhaled sharply. "I never meant for it to happen." Michael's grip on the wheel tightened. "What?" Jason swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to fall for him. But I did." The words crashed into Michael like a head-on collision. The world outside the car blurred into meaningless streaks of light. His stomach twisted as reality set in. His husband. His own brother. He let out a bitter laugh, one devoid of humor. "You expect me to believe that?" His voice cracked, raw with anger and disbelief. Jason leaned forward, desperation in his voice. "It wasn't planned, Michael. I tried to stop it. We both did." Michael slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. The car jolted to a stop, the sudden silence deafening. He turned to face Jason, his vision sharp despite the tears stinging his eyes. "Get out," Michael said, his voice cold. Jason didn't move. "Michael, please. Get out." And with that, the confession hung in the air, irreversible, as Jason hesitated before stepping into the night. The echo of Jason's confession still clung to the air, thick and suffocating. Michael sat motionless in the driver's seat, fingers trembling against the steering wheel. The car's engine hummed, a quiet, steady sound that felt at odds with the chaos inside him. He could still hear Jason's voice, the words looping, in his mind like a cruel melody. "I never meant for it to happen. But I did." Each syllable was a blade, carving through the fragile foundation of his world. Michael exhaled sharply, his breath unsteady. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the windshield, blurring through the wet glass. Outside, Jason stood on the sidewalk, his posture uncertain, his face a mask of regret. He hadn't left yet. He was waiting, hoping. But for what? Michael clenched his jaw, his pulse hammering against his temples. Love, trust, loyalty, everything he had believed in had unraveled in the space of a few sentences. The weight of Jason's words was crushing, settling deep in his chest, like an anchor pulling him under. I never meant to fall for him. The betrayal wasn't just about his husband. It was about Jason, the brother-in-law who had been there at family dinners, who had laughed with him over drinks, who had offered support during hard times, and all the while there had been something else, something hidden, growing in the shadows. A sudden wave of nausea rolled through him. He gripped the door handle, his body rigid, as if moving would shatter the last remnants of his composure. Jason took a step toward the car, his lips parting as if to say something. Michael put the car in drive, and without another glance, he left Jason behind, alone with the weight of his own words. Michael drove aimlessly through the city, the neon, lights blurring into streaks of color against the rain-slicked streets. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, yet his mind was elsewhere, lost in the wreckage of a love he thought was unbreakable. His chest felt hollow, his heart beat an uneven rhythm against the silence. The words still echoed, relentless. I never meant to fall for him, but I did. The betrayal clung to him, seeping into his bones like a sickness with no cure. He pulled into an empty parking lot, the engine still running as he rested his forehead against the steering wheel. The sound of raindrops drumming against the roof filled the void where his thoughts should have been. He tried to steady his breathing, but nothing helped. Every inhale carried the weight of what he had lost. Every exhale felt like a plea for something that would never return. His phone buzzed. He didn't have to look to know who it was. Jason, maybe even him. The man Michael had loved. The man he had trusted with everything. His secrets. His fears. His future. And now, it was nothing. More than shattered glass. A mosaic of broken promises and lies. A bitter laugh slipped past his lips, raw and aching. Had it all been a lie from the start? Or had it fallen apart piece by piece, so slowly he hadn't noticed until it was too late? Michael lifted his head, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, yet, beneath the weariness, something burned. Pain, rage, the unbearable weight of a glass heart, shattered in the middle of a night that would never be forgotten. The car was suffocating. The air, thick with words unspoken, pressed in on Michael's chest like Avis. Outside, the streetlights flickered, casting fleeting shadows across Jason's face. But there was no escaping this moment. No rewinding time. No undoing what had already been said. Jason's lips parted, hesitating, before he forced the words out. It started months ago. Michael's breath hitched. He didn't want to hear it. Not the details, not the timeline, not the confirmation of what he already knew, but had prayed, wasn't real. Yet Jason continued, as if now that the dam had broken, he couldn't stop the flood. He was lonely, Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. You were always working late, always busy. We didn't mean for it to happen, but Michael's fist slammed against the steering wheel. Don't! He hissed, his voice sharp enough to cut through the darkness. Don't you dare make excuses. Jason flinched but didn't stop. I loved him, Michael. His voice wavered, guilt twisting every syllable. Maybe I still do. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped Michael's lips. He turned to face Jason, his eyes gleaming with unshed tears and rage. And what am I supposed to do with that, Jason? Pretend it doesn't gut me? Pretend it's okay? Jason swallowed hard, but he had no answer. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, the city moving on as if Michael's world hadn't just imploded. He exhaled shakily, his voice hoarse. "Get out." Jason hesitated. "Get out." The door creaked open, and just like that, Jason stepped into the night, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of a love betrayed. Jason sat in the back seat, his hands trembling in his lap. The weight of his confession hung between them, thick and inescapable. Michael hadn't spoken in minutes, his grip on the steering wheel tightening with every passing second. The rhythmic thud of windshield wipers against the rain-slicked glass was the only sound between them, but inside, a storm raged. Michael exhaled sharply, his voice low, raw. "How long?" Jason's throat tightened. He could lie, soften the truth, but what was the point? 6 months. Michael let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. 6 months, he echoed, as if testing the weight of the words in his mouth, as if trying to comprehend how long he had been a fool. Jason leaned forward, desperate. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I fought it, Michael. I swear I did." Michael turned then, eyes blazing with something Jason couldn't decipher. Anger, hurt, or something far more dangerous. "But you didn't stop," Jason swallowed. "No." The confession lingered, thick as the humid air in the car. Michael's jaw clenched, and for a moment Jason saw something break in his expression. A crack in the armor. A glimpse of the man who had once trusted him. The man who'd once believed in love without betrayal. Jason's fingers twitched, instinct begging him to reach out, to touch, to soothe. But what right did he have? The desire that had once felt intoxicating now carried the bitter aftertaste of guilt. Michael's voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than any scream. "Do you love him?" Jason hesitated, and in that silence, Michael had his answer. The glow of the full moon spilled through the windshield, casting pale light over the empty road ahead. But Michael wasn't looking at the road. His hands gripped the wheel, white-knuckled, while his heart pounded in his chest. Beside him, Jason sat in silence, his face shadowed, unreadable. Michael finally spoke, his voice cold. "Tell me it's not true." Jason's breath hitched. He couldn't. The truth had already been spoken, ripped from his lips in a moment of weakness. Now there was no taking it back. Michael exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "God, I was so blind." He turned to Jason, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. Was it worth it? Jason swallowed, his throat dry. "I don't know." It was the only answer he could give, the only one that didn't feel like another lie. Michael let out a bitter laugh, one that carried no real humor. "You don't know." His voice cracked, raw with betrayal. "You ruined everything, Jason. And for what? A few stolen moments under the same damn moon?" Jason flinched. He wanted to say something, anything, to fix the wreckage between them. But what words could undo this? What excuse could erase the knife of betrayal lodged between them? Outside, the night was calm, indifferent to the destruction inside the car. Michael inhaled, steadying himself. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he unbuckled his seatbelt and pushed open the door. Jason tensed. "Michael!" But Michael didn't look back. He stepped out into the moonlit road, leaving Jason alone with nothing but regret and the ruin of what could never be repaired. Michael had always believed that love, real love, could survive anything. But now, as he sat in the driver's seat, the weight of Jason's betrayal pressing down on him, he realized how naive that belief had been. The car was silent, but the air between them crackled with everything left unsaid. Jason sat rigid in the passenger seat, his fingers curled into fists against his thighs. He looked like he wanted to say something, to explain, to justify. But what excuse could ever make this right? Michael let out a slow, bitter breath. Did you ever stop and think about what this would do to me? His voice was low, controlled, but underneath, the raw edge of pain cut through. Jason hesitated. Don't, Michael snapped, gripping the wheel tighter. Don't feed me. Another lie, I can't take it. Jason turned away, staring out the window, as if the darkness outside could somehow swallow the truth between them. I didn't want to hurt you, he murmured. Michael laughed, but it was hollow, empty. And yet, here we are. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like glass splintering under pressure, like fire and ice battling for control. It wasn't supposed to twist into something ugly, something unrecognizable. But that's what it had become. Michael exhaled sharply, his decision settling over him like a final, unshakable truth. Get out, Jason. Jason turned to him, eyes filled with something that might have been regret. Might have been love. But it didn't matter anymore. Michael didn't watch him leave. He kept his gaze forward, gripping the wheel of a life that no longer felt like his own. Love had been twisted. And now, it was torn apart. The night was thick with silence, but inside the car, the weight of unspoken words was deafening. Michael sat motionless, his fingers gripping the steering wheel, like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. Across from him, Jason sat still, his face half lit by the dim glow of the dashboard. Michael's voice finally broke through the stillness, raw and edged with disbelief. You were my brother. His breath shuddered. You were supposed to protect me, not destroy me. Jason's throat tightened. I never wanted this to happen. Michael scoffed, his laugh empty. Then why did it? His eyes burned, not just with betrayal, but with something deeper. Grief. You had every chance to stop, to tell me the truth, but you didn't. Jason looked away, shame washing over him. I loved him, Michael. Michael slammed his hand against the dashboard, his fury breaking through the cracks. He was my husband! The words came out hoarse, shredded by heartbreak. Do you have any idea what you've done? Jason flinched but didn't respond. Because there was nothing he could say. No apology that could erase the wreckage of his betrayal. Michael exhaled sharply, his body trembling from the weight of it all. I lost him, he whispered, but his voice held something darker than sorrow. And I lost you too. Jason's heart clenched. The man in the driver's seat wasn't his brother anymore. And as Jason stepped out into the cold, Michael finally let the tears fall, mourning not just his marriage, but the brother he could never forgive. Michael sat in the driver's seat, staring at the empty road ahead. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, thin rivulets of water sliding down the windshield. But inside the car, the storm raged on. Jason was still there, sitting in the passenger seat, his presence a wound that refused to close. The air between them was thick, too heavy to breathe, too sharp to ignore. Michael's fingers curled around the steering wheel. You understand there's no coming back from this, right? His voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that came after the breaking. Jason swallowed hard. Michael, please, don't. Michael's grip tightened. I need you to hear me. This isn't something we fix. This isn't something time erases. He turned, meeting Jason's gaze with a look so hollow, so exhausted, it didn't seem to belong to the man he once was. You didn't just betray me. You ended us. Jason's breath hitched. He knew. He had known the moment he spoke the truth. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. Michael exhaled, a slow, deliberate release. Then he reached for the door handle. Get out. Jason hesitated, desperation flickering in his eyes. But there was nothing left to say. No words that could undo what had been done. So he opened the door, stepped into the cold, watched as Michael sat there, unmoving, his hand still on the wheel. And then, as the door shut between them, Jason realized this was it, the point of no return. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in muted shades of pink and gray. The world was waking, but for Michael, the night had never ended. He stood by the car, the engine, still warm from the hours of restless driving. His body ached, his mind a storm of memories he couldn't silence. Every whispered promise, every stolen glance, every lie, they played on repeat, gnawing at what was left of him. Behind him, Jason approached cautiously, his voice tentative. Michael. Michael didn't turn. He stared at the sun rising. Over the empty stretch of road, his jaw clenched. Do you regret it? Jason hesitated. Michael turned then, eyes dark and unreadable. Don't lie to me. Not now. Jason swallowed hard. Yes. His voice was hoarse, stripped of all defenses. I regret hurting you. Michael studied him, searching for something. Guilt, shame, truth. But all he saw was a man who had already made his choice. Regret doesn't change anything, Michael said quietly. It doesn't unbreak what you shattered. He exhaled, slow and deliberate. And it sure as hell doesn't bring me back. Jason's face twisted with pain, but Michael didn't look away this time. He wanted him to feel it, to understand the cost of his betrayal. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the pavement. A new day had come, but it carried no promises, no peace, only reckoning. The threads of Michael's life had already begun to fray. But now, as he sat in the aftermath of Jason's confession, they unraveled completely. The hotel room was dim, the curtains barely letting in the dull morning light. He hadn't gone home. He couldn't. Home was where everything had fallen apart, where love had turned to deception, where trust had been reduced to ashes. Jason stood near the door, his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders tense. Michael, say something. Michael let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. What do you want me to say? His voice was rough, as if it had been scraped raw from all the words he wanted to scream but never did. Jason took a hesitant step forward. I never meant for this to happen. Michael's eyes snapped to him, fury flashing like a blade. That doesn't matter. It did happen. He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. And now, I have nothing. Jason's expression twisted with guilt. That's not true. Michael let out a bitter chuckle. Isn't it? My husband is gone. My brother is a stranger. He gestured around the room. And I'm here, hiding in some shitty hotel because I can't even bring myself to face what's left of my life. Jason flinched. He wanted to fix this. To hold on to something, anything, that wasn't completely destroyed, but there was nothing left to save. Michael let out a slow breath, his voice barely above a whisper. You took everything from me, Jason, and I don't even know who I am without it. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating, because this wasn't just a betrayal. It was the unraveling of everything Michael had ever known. Michael stood at the edge of the pier, the cold morning air biting at his skin. The waves crashed gently below, a rhythmic pulse against the silence that stretched between him and Jason. Jason stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. He had been waiting for Michael to decide if this was the end or if there was still something left to salvage. "I don't know why I came," Michael said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Jason exhaled. "Because some part of you still cares." Michael turned, his expression unreadable. "Caring isn't the same as forgiving." Jason swallowed hard. "I know." His voice was raw, stripped of excuses. "But I need you to hear me, not for him, not for what happened, but for us, for the fact that no matter how much I messed up, you're still my brother." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Brother?" He shook his head. "Brothers don't do what you did." Jason took a step closer. "I'll never ask you to forget it. But I'm asking if we can find a way forward." Michael looked back at the ocean, the horizon stretching out endlessly before him. Forgiveness was a choice, a heavy one. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, "and if I can't, then this is goodbye." Jason's breath hitched, but he nodded. "And if you can?" Michael hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Finally, he met Jason's gaze, his eyes filled with something uncertain, something fragile. "I don't know," he said again. "But if there's a chance, you'll have it." A choice hung between them, forgiveness or farewell, and only time would decide. The wind carried the scent of burnt wood and salt, the remnants of what once was scattering into the vast, endless sky. Michael stood motionless, watching as the last embers faded into the darkness. The house was gone. The memories remained. Jason stood. Beside him, silent. There were no more apologies left to give, no more justifications that could mend what had been broken. All that remained was the ruin of their past, smoldering in the quiet aftermath of betrayal. Michael exhaled, his breath shaky. "Funny, isn't it?" His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it. How fire has a way of cleansing things. Jason swallowed, guilt pressing heavy on his chest. "Michael?" Michael turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to know if I could forgive you." He let the silence stretch between them before shaking his head. "I think the better question is, do I even want to?" Jason's throat tightened, but he said nothing. Michael took a deep breath, stepping away from the ruins. "Some things don't get rebuilt, Jason. Some things are meant to stay in the past." He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the first hints of dawn were breaking. "I can't carry this anymore." Jason felt the finality in his words, and for the first time, he truly understood. Michael wasn't just walking away from him. He was leaving behind the ashes of what they once were, and in the end, maybe that was the only way forward.